Ah, the 1980s, a time when fashion was weird, music was great, and greed was good. A decade that began with the assassination of a music legend and ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And during the intervening years we were breakdancing in the street, puzzled by the Rubik's Cube and listening to music on Walkmans. On TV we were watching The A-Team and Miami Vice, and our cinema screens were graced with many of the best movies ever made. The 1980s was the decade of the boombox, the home computer and the yuppie, when everyone had big hair and we were consumed by consumerism. But for those of us who were children in the 80s, the decade was defined by some of the best toy brands ever created. And in this video we're going to count down the top 10 best 80s action figure toy lines, so stay tuned. Hey toy fans, my name is Tony and welcome to the Analog Toys YouTube channel, where we're obsessed with bringing you the history of vintage toys and action figures. And kicking us off in the number 10 slot is the Real Ghostbusters from Kenner. When the first Ghostbusters movie was released in theatres in 1984, it was an immediate smash hit, and its cultural impact was felt across the globe. But if you were a child in 1984 and you wanted to rush out and purchase Ghostbusters action figures, then you were destined for disappointment because there was nothing available. We would have to wait another 2 years, and when we did finally get our hands on Ghostbusters figures, they were based on the animated characters in the Real Ghostbusters cartoon and not based on the actors in the film. The action figures are nicely sculpted and stand just shy of 5 inches tall, and all 4 Ghostbusters are represented in the line, along with other key characters such as Slimer, although Kenner chose to call him the Green Ghost instead. While this is an iconic 80s toy line, the reason it doesn't rank higher on the list is due to the inclusion of a very boring playset, a significantly undersized Mr. Stay Puft, an Ecto-1 vehicle that can't even carry all 4 Ghostbusters at the same time, and figure accessories that are so fragile they can break just by looking at them sideways.
Oh, color me relieved.
Taking the number 9 slot on the list is Rambo and the Force of Freedom. Another action figure line to be based on a spin-off animated TV series, as opposed to the movies that popularised the brand in the first place. The Rambo and the Force of Freedom toy line was produced by Coleco and was first released in 1985. 12 different action figures were included in the first wave, and the characters stand approximately 7 inches tall. Each action figure is supplied with an abundance of accessories, and there are some quite nice face sculpts included, with Colonel Troutman being a real highlight. The range was also afforded a number of vehicles and a quite large playset. Unusually though for an 80s toy line, the playset was the headquarters for the bad guys. Although officially based on the Rambo and the Force of Freedom cartoon produced by Ruby Spears Entertainment, you can bet Coleco were trying to cash in on the popularity of the Rambo character, who became an 80s icon thanks to the film starring Sylvester Stallone. But since these movies were R-rated and definitely not made for kids, some toy experts were quick to criticise Coleco for introducing a toy based on a character that some thought glorified violence. But controversy aside, Coleco did provide us with an exciting range of figures and vehicles that were a hell of a lot of fun to play with.
What year is it anyway? 1985.
Coming in at number 8 is Kenner's Superpowers line. Hands down the most strikingly beautiful collection of action figures to come out of the 80s, Kenner's Superpowers toy line was based on DC Comics' vast roster of superhero characters, and the line included such icons as Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman. First released in 1984, these action figures stand slightly taller than the more common 3 3/4 inch scale figures that were featured in many other toy lines of the time, and most of the figures included an action feature gimmick, which unfortunately limited their articulation. A few of the figures in the line do come with accessories, but many of them do not, and while it is disappointing that Kenner never gave Batman a Batarang accessory, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because the Batman action figure was sculpted with closed fist hands, rendering any accessory useless. Although Batman was never afforded any small weapons or gadgets, Kenner did make up for it with the inclusion of the Batmobile, and this interpretation is one of the best toy versions of the Batmobile ever made. Despite a few drawbacks and some frustrating design choices, Kenner's Superpower line will always be remembered as one of the most stunning ranges of 80s action figures ever produced.
Let's pray this works.
Number 7 on the list of the best 80s action figure toy lines is the Transformers. I have a checkered history with Transformers, and many people believe that I don't like the franchise, but it's actually the cartoon I dislike, not the toys. But having said that, I was still reluctant to include Transformers on this list because I don't really consider them to be action figures. But I also knew someone would hunt me down and assassinate me if I did not include them here. Hasbro's Transformers toy line was devised when the company obtained the rights from Japanese toy company Takara for 2 of their most popular brands, Diaclone and Microchange. The toy assortment included a variety of vehicles and other inanimate objects, such as pistols and cassette players, which could transform into robot action figures. Despite the glaring scale issue where a cargo truck was actually smaller than a German pistol, Hasbro bought in Sunbow Productions to produce an animated TV series that would smash together these ridiculously out-of-scale toys and create a mythology that would go on to capture the imagination of an entire generation of children, and one that remains just as popular today as it was when it first launched. Although I have mixed feelings about the Transformers concept, I can't deny the brand's immense popularity, and Hasbro's Generation 1 Transformers toys went on to become one of the company's defining brands, as well as becoming one of the most iconic toy lines of the 80s.
Ravage into Children 1.
Coming in at number 6 on the list is The Adventures of Indiana Jones. Kenner's Adventures of Indiana Jones toy line was considered a retail backfire at the time of its release because the toys failed to capture the attention of early 80s children. But fortunately for Indy, this is a list of the best action figure lines and not a list of the most popular, and this modest assortment of toys from Kenner is one of the most highly detailed lines of the decade. The range included several 3 3/4 inch scaled action figures that featured a sort of hybrid of the articulation offered by Star Wars and G.I. Joe. But where the toy line really comes to life is with the high quality vehicles and playsets. The Maparu mini playset is intricate, the Desert Convoy truck is stunning, the Well of the Souls is one of the most detailed action figure playsets I've ever come across, and the Ark of the Covenant, with its glorious vac-metalized finish, is easily the most beautiful action figure accessory ever created. I love this toy line, and I doubt I'll ever fully understand why these toys spent so much of their time in the 80s in clearance bins, because Kenner's efforts here are far superior to many other more popular toy lines of the era. The quality on display in this range is simply undeniable, and The Adventures of Indiana Jones is definitely worthy of the number 6 slot on this list.
I don't know, I'm making this up as I go.
In the number 5 slot is Action Force from British toy company Palitoy. Palitoy is easily the best toy manufacturer in British history, and throughout the late 60s and all of the 70s, their most iconic toy brand was the 12-inch Action Man range of figures, outfits and vehicles. But when Kenner changed the face of the boys' toy market with their immensely popular and influential Star Wars toy line, which was released in a smaller 3 3/4 inch scale, many other toy companies followed suit, including Palitoy, who relaunched their popular Action Man brand in this smaller scale in 1982 and renamed it Action Force. The first year Action Force toys were mostly scaled down versions of popular Action Man sets, but things became really exciting in 1983 when Palitoy introduced a backstory that featured an enemy team led by the evil Baron Ironblood, who does battle with the 4 new Action Force teams: Space Force for missions above the Earth's atmosphere, Z-Force the conventional land army, Q-Force for nautical missions, and the Covert Strike Force, the SAS. These action figures may have minimal articulation, which is identical to Star Wars, but they are beautifully sculpted, and the range also features several repainted Hasbro G.I. Joe action figures. Whilst relatively unknown in the 80s outside of the UK and Europe, in Britain this toy line was incredibly popular, even outselling Star Wars toys in Christmas 1982. And with the inclusion of such stunning vehicles as the Z-Force ATC, the Q-Force Sea Lion, and the truly magnificent Robo Skull, how could I not pick Action Force for this list?
The wicked Baron Ironblood wants to rule the world through terror. Create your own Action Force to stop him. The Baron commands the hideous hyena to attack with Kraken in command. But they don't know about the new SAS Wolverine. The Wolverine fires its first missiles. Kraken tries to strike back, but the power of the Wolverine is decisive. Operation Hyena is over. But where will the Baron strike next? Action Force Toys. The battle has just begun.
And coming in at number 4 is Mask. Somewhat of a hybrid of G.I. Joe and Transformers, the Mask toy line was centered on a range of toy vehicles that featured complex action gimmicks that would convert the vehicle into a combat-ready mode. And like many other 80s toy lines, the franchise had an accompanying cartoon on TV to help with toy merchandising. Mask stands for Mobile Armored Strike Command, and the main premise revolved around the fight between this task force and a criminal organisation called Venom, which is another convoluted 80s acronym that spells out vicious, evil network of mayhem. The Mask action figures, like many others on this list, were produced by Kenner, and they were some of the smallest figures produced in the 80s. The action figures all included titular Mask accessories, but the vehicles were the biggest selling point of the line, and were what us kids really wanted. The range included such iconic toys as the Rhino and the Switchblade, and the often amazing transformations that the vehicles were capable of made for a toy line that was jam-packed with play value.
Venom.
As we get closer to the top slot, the number 3 entry is the classic line, Masters of the Universe. This franchise is a sci-fi fantasy mashup that is one of the most unique toy concepts introduced in the 1980s. Conceived and produced by toy company Mattel, the Masters of the Universe is a 5.5-inch tall range of action figures with colourful, bizarre designs, and the concept is centred on the battles between the heroic He-Man and the evil Skeletor, who fight for control of Castle Grayskull. Another hugely appealing 80s toy line, the popularity of Masters of the Universe reached stratospheric heights with the introduction of the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe cartoon that was produced by Filmation and first aired on television in 1983, and its cultural impact on the children of the 80s is unquestionable. For the action figure lineup, Mattel produced a range of quite durable figures with a limited articulation, but what made them stand out from the rest of the pack was their overly muscular design. These characters all look like roided up bodybuilders. But the real secret to the success of this toy line was in the catchphrase, "I have the power," which Prince Adam bellows out every time he morphs into the heroic He-Man. And I feel that children all over the world were captivated by the idea of being able to transform into the stoic character of He-Man.
You're a loser, Skeletor.
Taking the number 2 slot on this list is Star Wars. Inspired by the insanely popular trilogy of films produced by George Lucas, the Kenner Star Wars line literally reinvented the way that young boys played with toys in the late 70s. And even though this toy line was introduced in 1978, it became truly legendary throughout the first half of the 1980s. The popularity of Star Wars toys is solely responsible for the 3 3/4-inch scale action figure revolution that followed. And the concept of minifigures combined with amazing spaceship vehicles was a global success for Kenner. Although the figures were quite simple to begin with, they got a lot better throughout the 80s, and the vast assortment in the range afforded us all of our favourite characters from the movies. With the original Star Wars toy line, Kenner created a fully realised world for us to act out all the exciting adventures from a galaxy far, far away. And the range included everything from one-man fighters to bizarre creatures, huge play sets, and iconic spaceships. And it should come as no surprise that this toy line remains one of the most collected action figure lines of all time. Kenner's Star Wars is indicative of a zeitgeist moment in the memories of 80s children all across the world, and the nostalgia we feel for these small pieces of plastic can be rarely matched.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Before we reveal our top pick, here are some honourable mentions. Firstly, we have Galoob's A-Team, a toy line that was struck off the list due to its poor quality, but is worthy of mention if only for the inclusion of the fantastic A-Team tactical van. Next we have Thundercats, a toy line that I never got into as a kid, but I thought I'd best mention it for the same reason I included Transformers on this list. Someone might shoot me if I didn't. And the final honourable mention goes to the 1989 Batman action figure line. This is far from a great toy line, but I had to mention it because while the line might not have defined a decade, it certainly defined 1989.
Where does it get those wonderful toys?
And so coming in at number 1 is the all-time greatest 80s action figure toy line, G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero. Hasbro's G.I. Joe holds a special place in the history of toys, being the world's very first action figure when it was launched in 1964, and he became an overnight phenomenon. With the adventure team, G.I. Joe would continue to sell well through the early 1970s, but due to the oil crisis and the rising cost of petroleum-based plastic products, G.I. Joe was eventually priced out of the market and was discontinued in 1977. While the company's flagship toy line languished in retirement in the late 70s, the designers at Hasbro witnessed the phenomenal success of the Star Wars toy line, so they hatched a plan to bring G.I. Joe back to life in the now popular 3 3/4 inch scale. And that plan resulted in the introduction of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, in 1982. Hasbro were wise to what made Star Wars successful, and that was the combination of minifigures and affordable vehicles. But they felt they could do better than Kenner, and realising that a lot of G.I. Joe's early success was due to his articulation, they said, let's use the same scale as Star Wars, but we'll show Kenner how to make a truly exciting action figure. The end product was the most poseable, high-quality, small-scale toy figure the market had ever seen. And to further bolster the brand, we received a comic backstory from Marvel, which remains one of the best comic runs of the 1980s, and a cartoon that brought this colourful cast of characters to life. G.I. Joe is an iconic toy line with a breadth of scope that is unmatched in the entire history of action figures. I mean, let's be serious. The line included a 7-foot-long toy of an aircraft carrier. That's just insane! Hasbro's G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, didn't just define the toy landscape of the 1980s. For me, G.I. Joe is the 80s. So that's our list of the top 10 best 80s action figure toy lines. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to check out some of our other top 10 videos, you can click the links right here. I'm Tony from Analog Toys, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.